go of me! Ah! You can't do this! Ah!
He threw his ex-wife out of a luxury hotel, unaware she was the new owner. He stood at the entrance of the luxury hotel, watching security drag a woman toward the door. Not just any woman, his ex-wife. The same woman he once mocked for having nothing. The same woman he believed life had finished with. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not in silk floors and crystal lights. Not among billionaires and executives. He laughed as he ordered her thrown out, loud enough for everyone to hear. He didn't know this hotel had just changed hands. He didn't know the documents were already signed, and he didn't know the woman being humiliated was the reason the building still stood. By the time the truth surfaced, it was too late to apologize, too late to pretend respect, because in one moment of arrogance, he didn't just throw out his ex-wife, he threw out the new owner of his entire world. Before we continue this amazing story, please hit that subscribe button now, like this video, and comment below where you are watching from, and what time it is in your country. Now let's see what happened next. Glass doors slid open under the Lagos sun, releasing cold air that smelled like money, polish, and quiet authority. The marble floor reflected chandeliers like frozen lightning as a woman's heels scraped backward across it, slow, unwilling, humiliated. Outside, traffic groaned and horns cried, but inside the hotel, everything paused. Power lived here. And at the doorway, a man stood tall, shoulders relaxed, watching control unfold exactly how he expected it to, until something about the woman's stillness felt wrong. Security uniforms moved in practiced rhythm, firm hands guiding her toward the exit like she didn't belong among silk walls and muted gold. Heads turned, phones tilted, whispers bloomed. The man didn't rush. He enjoyed the moment, savoring the quiet dominance that came with being obeyed without question. This was Lecky. Status spoke louder than truth here. He believed the scene was already finished, but the tension in the air thickened, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Sunlight spilled across the threshold, cutting a sharp line between inside and outside, between who mattered and who didn't. The woman crossed it slowly, her shadow stretching behind her like a past refusing to let go. She didn't plead. She didn't struggle. That calm unsettled a few people watching, though no one said anything. The man noticed it too, briefly. Confidence pushed the thought aside. Silence, he assumed, meant defeat. He had no idea silence was only waiting. A valet froze mid-step. A concierge hesitated near the desk. Somewhere above, an elevator chimed and no one entered. These were small things, almost invisible, but power always shifts quietly before it breaks. The man didn't see the signs. His focus stayed locked on the woman, on the satisfaction of watching her reduced in public. This space had rules, and he believed he wrote them. What he didn't know was that rules had already been rewritten. Outside, heat rushed forward to meet her, wrapping her in Lagos noise and dust, a harsh contrast to the cold luxury she was being pushed out of. Inside, the lobby felt tighter, heavier. Eyes flicked between the man and the woman, searching for cues on how to react. Nobody moved to help. Nobody questioned him. That obedience fed his pride. Yet beneath it, something fragile began to crack, like glass under pressure. The woman paused just short of the pavement, fingers brushing the glass door as if memorizing its weight. Her reflection stared back, composed, unbroken, unreadable. Behind her, the man shifted his stance, impatient now, eager to close the chapter and move on. He thought this moment would end with her disappearing into traffic and memory. He didn't realize this doorway was about to become the center of his undoing. As the doors began to slide shut, cutting off the outside world, a single detail went unnoticed: how the staff's eyes no longer followed the woman but him. Power was still in his hands. For now. But something had changed in the room, something irreversible. The doorway had done its job. It had separated arrogance from truth, and what waited on the other side was already walking back toward him. Rain once soaked the narrow lecky street where the marriage cracked, water drumming on zinc roofs like bad news that wouldn't stop. Boxes sat half-packed in a dim room, the smell of damp cardboard mixing with old perfume and broken promises. Her hands shook as she folded clothes she had paid for, memories clinging like lint. The power had gone out, again. Darkness filled the corners. She stood alone in it, realizing the end wasn't loud, it was quiet, and it was final. Morning after morning had begun with hope, before it thinned into apology, then silence. She had carried the weight when money vanished, when smiles disappeared, when patience became a one-way street. Each sacrifice felt small then, almost invisible, until they stacked high enough to block the light. He stopped asking how she was coping, stopped noticing the effort, stopped seeing her. By the time he left, she had already learned what abandonment tasted like. Friends drifted away the way people do when shame enters the room. Calls slowed, invitations dried up. Her name became something whispered, attached to failure like a warning label. She learned to walk past mirrors without stopping, to dress for function instead of dreams. Nights stretched long and loud with doubt, the ceiling fan ticking like a clock that refused to move forward. Survival became the only plan she could afford. Work came in pieces, small jobs, early mornings, tired evenings. She counted coins with care, learning the math of endurance. Pride had to bend. Sleep came on buses, in queues, in borrowed chairs. Lagos never slowed for grief, and neither could she. Each day carved something away and replaced it with something harder. The woman she was becoming didn't look like victory yet, but she was learning how not to break. News of him reached her anyway. New circles, louder laughter, faster cars. Success wore his face like a mask, and the city applauded. She listened without reacting, storing the information like weather reports that didn't change her route. What she didn't know was how close their paths would cross again, or how the past was quietly arranging a meeting neither of them could avoid. Loss arrived in waves she couldn't predict. Some days it was manageable, other days it stole her breath in public places. She cried in bathrooms, on buses, beneath streetlights that flickered like uncertain witnesses. Still, she showed up. Still, she moved forward. Strength didn't announce itself. It gathered quietly, waiting for the moment it would finally be seen. When she finally lifted her head and looked ahead instead of back, something shifted inside her chest. The city felt different, less hostile, more open. She didn't know why yet. She only knew the woman he left with nothing was no longer empty. And somewhere in Lekki, fate was already setting the stage for the balance to tip. Air conditioning brushed her skin as she stepped fully into the hotel lobby, cold and deliberate, carrying the scent of lemon polish and restrained luxury. Her shoes touched silk-smooth marble, a surface so flawless it felt unreal beneath feet that had known rough roads. Chandeliers hovered above like frozen suns, casting soft light that refused to hide anything. She moved slowly, not because she was unsure, but because memory tugged at her ankles. This place felt too clean for her past, and that discomfort was only beginning. Across the lobby, his eyes found her again, narrowing as if trying to correct a mistake his brain refused to accept. She didn't fit the picture he had carried for years. Not here, not dressed this simply, yet standing this tall. The silence around her disturbed him more than noise ever could. He waited for embarrassment, for shrinking, for panic. None came. Instead, her calm landed heavy, like a truth that hadn't been explained yet. Every step she took echoed softly, bouncing off glass walls and polished pillars, stirring old scenes he had buried. He remembered cracked tiles, unpaid bills, her quiet patience. Odis seeing her here forced those memories to surface without permission. The contrast was sharp, luxury against struggle, present against past. He felt irritation rise, hot and defensive. Something about her presence felt like a challenge, even though she hadn't said a word. Staff members glanced at her, then away, unsure how to read the moment. She didn't look lost, but she didn't look like the usual crowd either. That in-between space made people uneasy. She paused near the center of the lobby, fingers brushing the edge of a marble counter, grounding herself. The cold stone reminded her she was awake, that this wasn't a dream. Still, the weight in the air suggested something fragile was about to break. He shifted his stance, irritation hardening into certainty. He told himself she was out of place. That coincidence had no deeper meaning. Lecky was full of illusions, people pretending, borrowing shine they couldn't afford. He assumed this was just another one. The thought steadied him, gave him permission to act. What he didn't realize was that illusions don't stand this calmly when challenged. She felt the room watching now, the subtle tightening of attention, the hum of curiosity. Years ago, this pressure would have crushed her. Now it settled like armor. She inhaled slowly, tasting recycled air and something sharper, anticipation. Her scars were still there, invisible but firm, reminders of what she had survived. She wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. That confidence was new, and it carried consequences. As he took a step forward, ready to reclaim control of the narrative, the space between them seemed to stretch, charged and unstable. The polished floor reflected both of them, one anchored in arrogance, the other in restraint. The hotel stood silent, waiting. And in that pause, before the next move was made, the past leaned in, ready to collect its debt. A sharp laugh cut through the lobby, bouncing off glass and marble like a crack in ice. It came from him, easy, confident, careless. The sound announced ownership before paperwork ever could. Shoulders loosened around him as people recognized the signal. This was his space to command. He enjoyed how the room bent toward that noise, how authority followed it like a trained dog. The laughter lingered longer than it should have, and somewhere beneath it, a thin line of tension began to hum. Security shifted closer at his cue, movements crisp and rehearsed, boots whispering against polished stone. The choreography felt final, decisive, the kind that erased doubt. He watched her from the corner of his eye, expecting the old reactions to return. Hesitation, shame, retreat. None arrived. Her stillness felt louder than his laughter, a calm that refused to play its part. The imbalance unsettled him, and irritation hardened into resolve. Phones lifted subtly across the lobby, lenses catching reflections and fragments, feeding the appetite of public moments. A few smiles flickered, then faded, replaced by curiosity. The air cooled further, the hum of the building deepening as elevators slid past floors unseen. He mistook the quiet for agreement, the crowd's silence for approval. Power often makes that mistake, and mistakes, once made in public, rarely forgive. She adjusted her posture, not in surrender but in alignment, as if bracing against a sudden wind. The marble beneath her feet felt steady now, familiar even. Light skimmed across her face and refused to find panic. That refusal irritated him more than defiance ever could. He leaned into the moment, certain the ending was already written. He didn't see the way staff exchanged glances or how the room's attention began to tilt away from him. A distant door closed with a soft thud, echoing like punctuation. Somewhere above, footsteps paused. The building seemed to listen. He pressed forward, convinced that speed would keep him ahead of doubt. Control, he believed, was about momentum. But momentum without awareness runs straight into walls. And walls, once hit, don't move. Heat from outside crept back in as the doors cycled, bringing the smell of exhaust and sea air from Lecky's coast. The contrast sharpened everything. Cold luxury inside, raw life outside. He felt powerful straddling that divide, deciding who crossed and who didn't. The pleasure was brief, like a spark in dry air. Sparks burn fast, and burns leave marks. As his laughter faded, He's replaced by the rustle of movement and breath held too long. The room tightened into a single question no one dared ask aloud. Was this truly the end of her chapter, or the opening of his reckoning? The answer hovered just beyond reach, waiting for the next step to be taken. Murmurs spread through the lobby like heat under glass, soft at first, then restless. Heads leaned together, eyebrows lifted. Assumptions formed faster than facts ever could. Some faces carried pity, others carried quiet enjoyment, the kind people hide behind polished manners. The crowd didn't know her story, but they didn't feel the need to. In places like this, appearances decide guilt. And right now, she looked like the easiest verdict. Phones shifted in palms, screens glowing like tiny stages hungry for drama. A few people angled themselves for a better view, pretending to check messages while tracking every movement. No one intervened. No one asked questions. Judgment felt safer from a distance. The man's confidence gave them permission to believe the worst about her. Collective silence wrapped around the moment, heavy and complicit, pressing toward an ending they thought they understood. She felt the weight of their eyes, sharp and measuring, brushing against her skin like dust she couldn't wipe away. Years ago, this kind of attention would have folded her inward. Now, it only reminded her how often people mistake quiet for weakness. She kept her gaze steady, breathing slow, letting the noise wash over her without entering. Still, the tension grew, because calm in the face of humiliation unsettles those expecting collapse. A woman near the concierge desk shifted uncomfortably, a lips tightening as if something didn't sit right. A man beside her frowned, glancing between the ex-husband and the woman being pushed out, sensing a mismatch he couldn't name. Doubt flickered in small pockets, fragile and easily ignored. The crowd hovered between curiosity and conscience, unsure which direction to lean. And in that hesitation, the balance began to tilt. The lobby lights reflected off polished shoes and designer bags, symbols of arrival and belonging. Everyone there had fought to be seen as successful. Nobody wanted to question the order that welcomed them, so they watched instead, convincing themselves it wasn't their place to interfere. Shame, when shared, feels lighter, but it never disappears. It only waits for the moment it turns around. She shifted her weight slightly, the movement small but deliberate, like a signal sent without words. A few eyes caught it. Something about her refusal to rush, to beg, to explain, cracked the neat story forming in their minds. The crowd sensed it too. That uncomfortable feeling when a narrative doesn't settle the way it should. Curiosity edged out certainty, and certainty began to wobble. As the whispers thinned into uneasy silence, attention drifted away from her humiliation and toward the man orchestrating it. Judgment, once aimed outward, slowly turned inward. The crowd hadn't chosen sides yet, but the ground beneath their assumptions was shifting. And when a crowd starts to doubt, the fall, when it comes, is never gentle. Upstairs, sunlight spilled across her apartment balcony, catching dust particles that danced like tiny memories. She had watched years pass quietly, unnoticed, a building strength from absence and endurance, from pain. No one had asked how she survived. No one had cared. The man at the lobby assumed silence was defeat, but she had been speaking in ways invisible to him. Through every choice, every morning she got up, every door she opened despite fear. Her nights had been long and empty, filled with city sounds, motors humming, waves crashing against Lecky's shore, and distant laughter that didn't reach her. She had cried quietly, letting grief carve hollows that later became the scaffolding of resilience. Every tear was a reminder that life didn't pause for heartbreak, and every hollow left space for something stronger to grow, something no arrogance could touch. The small jobs she took, delivering parcels, organizing events, tutoring, weren't glamorous, but each was a brick in the foundation of her independence. Coins counted carefully, schedules mapped meticulously, hours stretched and bent to her will. Lagos demanded survival skills sharper than knives, and she had honed them in silence. She had been invisible, yes, but in that invisibility, she had become unstoppable. Photos of him occasionally floated through social media, dinners, trips, laughter that had once belonged to them. The world applauded his life while ignoring hers. She did not watch. She did not care. She understood that applause never measures worth. Her own life had meaning. She had rebuilt herself. And yet, the contrast, his visible triumph and her hidden strength, was about to collide in ways neither could predict. Her scars, invisible to strangers, told stories of persistence and endurance. They were etched in the way she carried herself, in the quiet assertiveness of her posture, in the calm precision of her gaze. The man at the lobby would never recognize them until it was too late. The world rarely sees the work done in shadows, and he was about to learn that shadows hold power, patience, and timing that never fails. She walked through Lekki streets as though invisible, yet every step echoed the woman she had become. Power doesn't announce itself with shouting. It gathers quietly, waiting for the moment it will finally be acknowledged. No one had asked her, "How did you survive?" She smiled at the thought. It didn't matter. Her resilience had been its own answer, and in a few moments that answer would speak louder than any arrogance could. The lobby doors would soon swing open again, reconnecting past and present. The man would assume he still controlled the narrative. He had no idea that the woman he once left with nothing had spent years preparing for this exact moment. Her silence, her patience, and her scars were about to rewrite every expectation. And when she stepped forward, everything he thought he knew would shatter. The morning sunlight glinted off the polished glass of the hotel's boardroom, casting long lines across sleek desks and leather chairs. Papers lay stacked neatly, waiting for hands that had already decided fate. A signature at the bottom of one document had shifted ownership silently, invisibly, while the man in the lobby laughed hours ago. He had no idea that control was no longer his. One stroke of a pen had rewritten what he thought permanent. The weight of legality and legacy had quietly entered the room, ready to unfold. She had walked into this world armed with patience, endurance, and the knowledge that the universe has its own timing. The signature wasn't luck. It was consequence. A hidden decision made years ago, when sacrifice outweighed recognition, had been lying in wait. Every late night, every unpaid debt, and every quiet effort had built toward this invisible power. The ink had dried, and with it the balance had shifted. She had been preparing for this without knowing the audience, and the audience was now him. In the lobby, the man barked instructions, watched her supposed humiliation unfold, oblivious to the truth already signed. The papers upstairs had given her authority over him, over the building, over everything he thought he could claim. It was a quiet victory, invisible in its approach but absolute in impact. The document, a simple piece of paper in someone else's eyes, was a sword sheathed in patience, ready to strike at the perfect moment. Staff who had observed her presence earlier now whispered quietly, sensing something shifting beyond their comprehension. The balance of power had changed without noise, yet their instincts told them to tread carefully. Eyes flicked between the lobby and the upper floors, knowing, without knowing why, that something irreversible was in motion. The lobby, once his stage, had become a pressure cooker, and the signature upstairs was the unseen hand twisting the heat tighter. She moved with quiet confidence, a ghost of the woman he had dismissed years ago. No one knew the story of late nights spent gathering knowledge, negotiating silently, signing papers without applause. Ownership doesn't always roar. It sometimes waits, patient and precise, until it steps forward. She had waited for years, and that waiting was about to declare itself to the man who thought he had the last word. Outside, traffic hummed along the Lekki streets, oblivious to the unfolding drama inside. The world moves for the unprepared, for those blind to patience and timing. And here, the unprepared man was about to discover that his arrogance had met a strategy far older than his assumptions. The pen's mark had already spoken, quietly sealing a reversal he hadn't imagined. Fate, calm and deliberate, had signed in invisible ink across his pride. The lobby doors slid open again, the same woman stepping through as if she had never left. This time, though, the space around her carried a different weight. Authority, claim, inevitability. The signature had given her more than papers. It had given her the stage for reckoning. The man's laughter, once commanding, would now face the consequences of silent justice, and every spectator was about to witness what patience, persistence, and unseen effort can truly achieve. Footsteps halted mid-step, boots frozen against the marble floor, hands hovering over polished brass door handles. Security guards, trained to respond without question, found themselves suspended in hesitation. The woman stood still, a figure of composed authority, yet silent. Their instinct to obey clashed with something deeper, an invisible shift in power they didn't yet understand. The lobby, once an arena for his dominance, had become charged with tension that no training could erase. Every second stretched long enough to feel like a warning. He barked orders again, sharper this time, voice slicing through the polished air like a whip. Out! Now! But the guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances, caught between protocol and something unsettling they couldn't name. The world seemed to tilt, gravity bending around a silent truth. His confidence faltered, tiny cracks forming in a veneer that had never failed him before. He noticed the change too late. Obedience was no longer guaranteed. The crowd, sensing hesitation, drew a collective breath. Phones tilted, whispers rising in pitch, curiosity mingling with disbelief. Faces that once mocked her now flickered with uncertainty. Eyes that had measured humiliation paused, scanning for answers. The man's laughter, previously commanding, faltered. The power of perception, once entirely his, had begun to drift. A subtle unease settled over the room, pressing against arrogance like a tide slowly reclaiming sand. She moved one deliberate step forward, heels clicking softly against marble, each sound like a metronome marking authority. Her posture radiated calm control. She didn't need to shout, to gesture, only to force recognition. Her presence alone demanded attention. The first real crack appeared in the man's composure, a subtle tightening of the jaw, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The guards weren't just pausing, they were reconsidering. The game had changed. The elevators chimed silently, doors sliding closed in sync with a moment's tension, cutting off other distractions. Outside, Lecky's traffic hummed, irrelevant to the storm inside. Every polished surface reflected the standoff, the glimmer of chandeliers capturing the shift in light and control. The air felt heavier, electric, almost palpable, as if the building itself recognized the reversal underway. Authority was no longer one-sided. It had become a living, shifting force. He opened his mouth to speak again, but words faltered, slowed, then stalled entirely. Commands felt thin and hollow against the weight of unseen ownership. Each breath he took carried the sharp awareness that something fundamental had shifted. He had underestimated the patience and resilience of the woman he once dismissed. The silence that followed was louder than any argument, pressing on the chest like smoke, disorienting and undeniable. The crowd leaned in slightly, tension spilling from the lobby into every corner. Security's pause was no longer mere hesitation, it was recognition, the first acknowledgement of the truth the man had yet to accept. And in that frozen, fragile moment, the woman's quiet authority filled the room like light spilling over shadows. The first domino had fallen, and he was already too late to stop what came next. A sharp voice cut through the frozen tension, carrying a name he hadn't expected to hear. It rolled over the marble floors and bounced against chandeliers, sudden and undeniable. The syllables hit him like ice water, shattering confidence he thought unbreakable. Heads turned, phones lifted, whispers stopped mid-breath. Recognition settled over the room, heavy and inescapable. The crowd, which had waited for the drama, now watched the collapse of arrogance unfold in real time. His heart thumped in an uneven rhythm, a pulse he could feel behind his eyes. Pride, once polished and sharp, crumbled quietly but relentlessly. The name summoned authority, history, and ownership he hadn't accounted for all at once. He tried to mask it with a smirk, but the air was already charged. The lobby no longer obeyed his expectations. It mirrored the truth, reflecting the woman he had once dismissed as powerless, now undeniable. Her gaze lifted as the name echoed, unshaken. Calm radiated from her in quiet waves, as if the world itself deferred to her presence. She didn't smile, didn't taunt. She let recognition do the work, letting the weight of the moment sink deep into the man who had thought himself untouchable. Around them, staff and onlookers sensed a pivot, a shift from spectacle to reckoning, from power assumed to power deserved. He swallowed hard, chest tightening, every instinct screaming for control that no longer existed. Memories of past mockery, past dismissals, past triumphs over her flashed, sudden and cruel. The crowd had once cheered him silently, but now their attention sharpened, hungry for the unraveling of a man who had overstepped. Every moment he had underestimated her returned, echoing in the very tiles beneath his feet. The hotel seemed to pause. Every elevator, every automatic door, every reflection in the polished marble amplifying the shift. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was consequence. He realized too late that the name was more than identification. It was validation, proof of unseen preparation and patient endurance. Ownership had been quietly claimed, and his command meant nothing in comparison. Her calm presence anchored the space, drawing the attention of the crowd away from him and toward her authority. Security adjusted instinctively, staff straightened, and the lobby itself seemed to recognize her claim. The balance, once skewed, now held firm on her side. Every step, every breath, every flicker of light seemed to emphasize the reversal he could not undo. As the echo of her name faded into the silence, the man's eyes darted to the documents he hadn't yet understood. Regret arrived too late, heavy and bitter filling his chest. The moment was no longer about pride, humiliation, or control. It was about realization. Arrogance had met patience, cruelty had met preparation, and the world had finally recognized the woman he once left with nothing. Silence stretched across the lobby, thicker than any roar of laughter could have been. The man's face, once commanding, tightened under the weight of stares. Phones still captured every movement, but the energy had shifted. The spectacle he had created now reflected back onto him. Eyes that once followed her for amusement now lingered on him, questioning, calculating, judging. The humiliation had a price, and in this moment, it was his turn to pay. Every step he had taken to assert dominance now seemed heavy and awkward. Each command he barked fell flat, unheeded. The staff, who once obeyed instantly, now hesitated as if sensing the reversal already underway. His arrogance, once a shield, now made him vulnerable. The world he thought belonged to him had turned into a stage where every movement broadcast his error, his misjudgment, his pride. The crowd, sensing the shift, leaned forward. Whispers spread like wildfire, no longer about her presence but about his unraveling. Eyes narrowed, heads shook, subtle smirks appeared in quiet corners. He had orchestrated humiliation as spectacle before, but this was different. The judgment was now collective, silent but piercing. Every observer became a witness to the consequence of cruelty, each glance a reminder that arrogance can be contagious, but so is the cost of its exposure. He tried to reclaim composure, straightening his shoulders, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. But the polished marble reflected more than his posture. It mirrored his panic, hesitation, and defeat. The chandeliers above cast light on every subtle twitch, every shallow breath, every falter. Humiliation isn't always shouted. Sometimes it creeps in through quiet observation, and that kind of exposure is relentless. She stood, silent and composed, the embodiment of restraint and dignity. No words were needed, no dramatic gestures required. Her authority spoke louder than any proclamation. Each step she took forward emphasized his weakness, her poise highlighting his reckoning. The lobby, once his stage, had become the arena for consequences, and he had no allies in the room capable of tipping the balance back. The luxury around them, crystal chandeliers, polished floors, curated art, felt smaller, tighter, almost suffocating. It bore witness to his loss, reflecting status without protecting it. All the symbols of wealth and dominance he had once clung to became meaningless in the presence of patience and strategy. Power, he realized too late, isn't inherited, bought, or assumed. It's earned, observed, and defended. As he sank into the weight of silent judgment, the crowd absorbed the lesson quietly but firmly. Karma had entered through doors he had opened with arrogance, moving slowly, deliberately, with the precision of inevitability. The price of public humiliation was no longer just embarrassment. It was recognition that his choices, his cruelty, and his underestimation of her had all returned. And in Lecky that day, the lesson lingered far longer than anyone's laughter ever could. She walked through the lobby with slow, measured steps, each click of her heels a quiet assertion of authority. The chandeliers above glinted off polished marble, illuminating her calm presence. Ownership was no longer about papers or titles. It was in the way she carried herself, in the weight of restraint and dignity. Every eye in the room followed, but hers was fixed forward, focused on the space she had claimed through patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. The man's face remained taut, caught between disbelief and simmering anger. He had believed power could be forced, demonstrated through arrogance and commands. Yet here, authority didn't shout, it radiated. It filled the room in quiet waves, demanding respect without begging for it. His attempts to reclaim dominance now seemed shallow, petty, and transparent. Ownership, she had learned, is not granted by fear. It is recognized by those who understand patience, preparation, and timing. Staff moved instinctively to align with her presence, not out of fear but respect. Even security adjusted subtly, a silent acknowledgement that authority had shifted. The polished floors reflected her reflection alongside his, and the contrast was stark. One composed, measured, grounded, the other tense, reactive, and shrinking under the weight of realization. The lobby, a symbol of wealth and hierarchy, now mirrored a deeper truth. Power belongs to those who build it, not those who assume it. She paused near the center, hands lightly touching the marble counter as if feeling the heartbeat of the building itself. Lecky's afternoon sun filtered through the glass doors, casting long, deliberate shadows. The light fell on her face, revealing quiet satisfaction, tempered by years of sacrifice. Ownership, she knew, meant more than titles. It meant mastering patience, commanding attention without shouting, and letting others witness your triumph without spectacle. The man shifted uneasily, realizing that every instinct he had relied on was failing. Orders were meaningless, commands ignored, arrogance exposed. He had assumed control could be taken through intimidation. She had shown that control could also be quietly claimed, nurtured, and executed with precision. Her ownership was a statement. Dignity, strategy, and resilience could never be taken lightly. And in that realization, his pride fractured further. The crowd now absorbed the lesson, silently witnessing the shift in balance. No one applauded, no one shouted, yet the power dynamics were undeniable. Ownership, they understood, is not a title. It is presence, impact, and influence felt by everyone around. The woman had rewritten every expectation silently, calmly and without theatrics. The luxury hotel, once his stage, had become her canvas. As she moved toward the entrance, the lobby seemed to follow, every reflection, every glint of light reinforcing the lesson. Ownership had been redefined, not by wealth alone, not by force, but by patience, vision, and resilience. The man had lost more than authority. He had witnessed a fundamental truth. Control is not given. It is earned, lived, and felt. And in that moment, Lecky itself seemed to acknowledge her victory. The doors of the hotel closed behind her with a soft thud, but their echo lingered like a verdict. Outside, Lecky's sun reflected off the Atlantic waves, indifferent to human drama. Inside, every polished surface, every chandelier, every marble floor had witnessed the collapse of arrogance. Karma had not whispered. It had walked in silently, deliberately, with the patience of years spent unnoticed. The man, still frozen, realized the full weight of the consequences he had ignored, and the lesson hit harder than any confrontation could. People in the lobby shifted, murmurs spreading as reality sank in. The crowd that once watched her humiliation now bore witness to his unraveling. Phones captured faces that were previously amused, now stunned and reflective. Laughter had turned into silence. Gossip had turned into awe. Lecky had seen many power plays, but this quiet reversal of fortune, was almost sacred. Karma didn't need spectacle. It only needed timing, and it had chosen perfectly. He slumped slightly. Every instinct he had relied upon crumbling beneath him. Pride, once polished and sharp, lay in tatters. The realization burned hotter than shame alone. It was the knowledge that his assumptions, arrogance, and cruelty had built the very stage for his own downfall. The woman he had discarded, underestimated, and mocked had become the architect of the ultimate reckoning. And now, the audience, unwitting and silent, it absorbed every lesson in their own way. She paused at the lobby's center one last time, letting the quiet settle around her like a mantle. Ownership, patience, and resilience radiated without a word spoken. Her journey from loss to triumph was now visible to anyone willing to see. No shout, no taunt, no vindictive gesture, just undeniable presence. Karma, she embodied it. Life, she proved, always balances the scales when arrogance forgets humility. Outside, the hum of Lecky's streets returned, traffic moving as if nothing had changed, waves crashing in steady rhythm. But inside, a truth remained. Actions leave echoes, patience bears fruit, and cruelty eventually circles back. The man's arrogance had collided with unseen preparation, and the result was as precise as it was inevitable. He had thrown her out of the hotel, but she had reclaimed not just the building, but the moral high ground, the victory no money could buy. Staff, once passive observers, now moved with new awareness. Eyes lingered respectfully, gestures subtly acknowledging the woman who had turned silence into authority. The room itself seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging that balance had been restored. The lesson, though quiet, cut through arrogance sharper than any public insult. In Lecky that day, people understood. Underestimating resilience and patience comes at a cost, and karma doesn't knock, it arrives on its own schedule. As she walked toward the elevator, the man's gaze followed, empty of defiance, full of regret. The story didn't end with confrontation or screams. It ended with the undeniable presence of truth and quiet power. Lecky's sunlight reflected off glass and marble, highlighting a victory earned through patience, strategy, and endurance. Karma had walked in, silently and perfectly timed, and for anyone watching, the message was clear. Never measure a person by the lowest chapter of their life, for life always balances the scales.